I am Shane.
And I'm Alex.
And this is the RPM Podcast.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for our post-race discussion for the 2021 Emilia Romagna Grand Prix, where Max Verstappen finally cast aside his Italian curse to win at Imola. Now, no doubt many of us were probably a little bit skeptical of how the race might pan out because of the nature of the track and the way that these cars are now. But a potent concoction of mixed conditions, safety cars, red flags, spins, and more produced drama from start to finish. In fact, there was a whole bunch of drama before the race even got underway. So we'll be sure to cover it all in today's episode, as well as touching on the build-up to Sunday. Now, before we get started, we've made a few changes to the way that we structure the podcast. We're always trying to improve and have made lots of changes as we've gone along since we started. But Shane, run us through what we're doing differently with the podcast from today.
So traditionally, we've done a kind of a lap-by-lap encounter of the race, and we've tried to spend a good amount of time throughout the whole podcast talking about each and various events. We had a discussion yesterday about how we just want to have more of a discussion. We want to have more talking points about the podcast and about the race itself. So we decided to just have a handful of talking points about the race. So we'll cover all the good stuff and all the bad stuff, all the bits you love. But it'll be more of a discussion, and then we won't be doing like a lap by lap counter before and after these events, just to make it a little bit more fluid and just I think we'll enjoy it a lot more. But it's a trial, so we'll see how it goes. Give us your feedback below, and we'll carry on from now. So moving into the race weekend, we actually had, like Alex alluded to earlier, we had a lot of drama in the free practice sessions and the qualifying session, but it all started off with a bit of a technical error. So I was quite happy. I had Friday off. I don't have many Fridays off, and I was like, yes, I can sit down and watch 2 hours of Formula One. I can watch the Friday, the Saturday, it's going to be great. I'm just going to miss the race itself. And I sat down with a cup of tea in one hand and some biscuits in the other hand, and I was greeted with silence and beautiful scenic shots of the Grand Prix circuit. It is a very beautiful place. The people who live there are very lucky, aren't they? Let's be honest. They've got some of the best seats in the house. They were climbing all over their roof during the race, which was great considering it had been pouring down. So I'm not sure how safe that was, but we'll brush that aside.
Did you see the picture of the kids on the trampoline looking onto the track?
Yeah, absolutely. How cool is that? Makes me really jealous. But Friday, practice one, there was no on board. And there was no onboard footage, and it took a while for them to actually have any footage of the action at all. I think for the first 5 or 6 minutes, it was just aerial shots of an empty track. And we heard that some drivers were leaving the pits because the commentators were letting us know that, but there was just no action whatsoever. And there was a technical fault, of course, somewhere down the line, but it affected the broadcast as much as the teams itself. There was loads of technical issues, and just made it very... just a bit, I don't know, it made me feel a bit uneasy. Like, we've got so used to having on-track footage and on-board cameras, that's what I meant to say. We got so used to having on-board cameras that actually just watching it from when everything was fixed and we were just watching it from the trackside cameras, how much I missed them. It feels like such a big part of the show, the on-board cameras. Do you know what exactly happened? I have an idea. I don't know if you've looked into it any more.
Well, the story behind it is interesting, and it ties into the way that Formula One has changed in recent years, because as part of their sustainability plans and the like, they had planned to have more remote operations for Formula One. So a lot of the cutting together of the stuff for broadcast and preparing packages, offering things up to the director, like different onboards and shots, team radios. They basically endeavored to have that set up remotely so that they can easily operate for any race and not have to cart a load of people all the way around the world like they used to in order to organize the broadcast. They've brought all this forward because of the coronavirus. That's encouraged them to bring their plans further forward than they had thought they might. And as I understand, what happened is that at Biggin Hill, which is basically in somewhere near London, but that's where they've got their main base of operations for all these remote operations. And there was a power outage there of some kind, which basically caused issues with the radios. Like you mentioned, nobody caught what happened between Perez and Ocon because there was no footage of it. But there's a fascinating video on the official F1 channel where they talk all about the changes that they've made to their remote operations, and it's really interesting. They talk about, hundreds and hundreds of terabytes of data being transferred for every race weekend and all the rest of it. It's a fascinating remote operation, but on this particular occasion, it went horribly wrong.
So it wasn't the first weekend they tried it. They've been doing this for a while, it seems.
I think so, yeah. I think they've been going for like the last year or so. They've been sort of transitioning to these more remote operations, basically, as I understand it.
Yeah. Well,
it's
fair play to them for. Yeah, I'm going to watch that after this. But you've mentioned it already. The Perez and was it Perez?
Yeah, it was Perez and Ocon.
Perez and Ocon. We caught the last bit on the trackside camera, just like Perez going for a spin and Ocon pulling over on the side. But it just fascinated me how we've got the pinnacle of motorsport and all this brilliant technology, and yet none of the teams knew what happened. The FIA didn't have a clue what happened. The stewards didn't have a clue what happened. They were just waiting for the drivers to come back to the pen or to the pit lane to confirm what exactly happened, or to hard download the camera's recording from the car essentially into the computer when they got back to the garage to have an understanding of what happened. I just found it so mad that we couldn't get a replay. It just felt really odd. Like we were taking a step back in time where we couldn't see that part of the track. I put a tweet out during the practice session and how I found it strange how there's not cameras positioned around the whole track to capture every single race moment. And loads of people let me know in the most politest way, like Twitter does, that there are cameras around the track, but not all of them are broadcasting cameras. They're just basically security cameras, or they're run for different events. So the cameras are there, but each race event only has access to a handful amount, or the ones which they need to, because in the actual race they've got helicopters, they've got fly cams. I'm not sure they've got drones at the moment, but that's something they're probably looking into. So they've got all these different types of cameras to capture the whole track, but whereas in practice, obviously, they only had a handful around the track itself.
Yeah. All right. So the qualifying then, we saw a couple of interesting results here. Some good, some very good, and then stripped away, sadly. Let's talk before we get to. Obviously, we're going to chat about Norris's qualifying result, or the result that wasn't. Just looking at qualifying in general, the first major thing was obviously Tsunoda crashing out. My first impression on that is that I feel like he needs to chill out a little bit. He seems very like so angry, and most rookies are quite almost quite demure when they get started. And Tsunoda is just all guns blazing immediately, getting angry. He was livid with Perez at one point. I'm not really sure why. Obviously felt like he was impeded. Ended up crashing out. It's not really good for AlphaTauri. This is like their home track, basically. They're only based down the road. Yuki would have been going around in probably like a Toro Rosso whilst he was getting settled in with the team. They will have done filming days there. And I feel like he's lost his head a little bit in qualifying and ended up binning it. And although he did eventually end up having a good recovery drive, which we can touch on later, he really put himself in a bit of trouble by starting at the back of the grid because of that. And I think overall the guy needs to take a slightly more subdued approach.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, because he on the radio he's quite verbal, and I know across the whole race weekend there's thousands of radio messages going back and forth, and we hear less than 1% of them, and they're usually quite structured in a way to create drama for the TV. But Yuki, like you said, like straight on the radio, this is a traffic paradise. What is going on? And then like you said, he binned it, and it's a shame because, like you mentioned, AlphaTauri are based quite close to the circuit. They've been doing loads of practice there. Their winter testing was there. Their filming day was there. Sorry. So they know the track very well, and it was a track where they could have picked up a handful of points each. But he just needs to just calm down a little bit, just be a little bit more reserved. That passion and that energy is great, but he's just channeling too much of it. It just needs to dial it down from 100%, just a 95, just to keep him on the track and just to keep everything a little bit more calm, cool, and collective. Like continue being passionate, because he's showing some great things early on in this season, but just dial it down a little bit just to keep everything under control. That's what he's losing at the moment, just that little bit of control.
Yeah, a good opportunity for AlphaTauri lost there on that side of the garage. There was good news, however, for Williams, with both cars getting into Q2. It was a very positive sign for them. Russell finished behind his teammate at the end of a qualifying session for the first time in his F1 career. Obviously, the end qualifying result was that Russell was ahead, but it was the end of Q1 where Latifi was actually ahead of him. So
yeah,
much more promising for Williams by Saturday.
There was almost a little bit of doubt whether whether Russell would beat Latifi this weekend, because Latifi from the get-go has been very strong this whole race weekend. He's been very consistent, whereas Russell, we haven't really seen. I don't know. Well, it's hard to say we haven't seen much from that driver through FP1 to FP3, but especially through that first qualifying session, Latifi was doing really well, and then Mr. Saturday came back on Q2 and pipped him by 2 places, which is great. But P12 and P14, there's a round of applause for Williams. I mean, they've come from some really troublesome times in the last couple of years, but it's by no means brilliant at the moment, but it's so much better than it has been. I mean, P12 and P14, I've got the timing sheets here. George Russell got a 1:15.2 and P10 was a 1:15.13. So we're 2 tenths away from Russell potentially entering in Q3, which is just brilliant. Race pace just needs to stick with it as well.
Yeah, we also saw that Bottas was nearly half a second down on Hamilton. Now, last year and in previous seasons, that's a deficit that you can kind of get away with because the Mercedes was so much faster than everyone else, so he could be 3 or 4 tenths slower and still second or third. But now, with the grid being so much closer now, and with Red Bull really being in contention, as are McLaren and Ferrari, their rivalry is coming back. That deficit left him, I think he was like P8 when he started on the grid, which is really, I mean, not nearly good enough for a Mercedes. And unfortunately, the plaudits at the front of the grid were there to be taken by Perez and Hamilton, ultimately. Bottas should have really been in the mix as well, but he wasn't. And Perez, obviously, as I mentioned, did a great job, managed to get onto that front row. I think that really vindicates Red Bull's choice, putting Perez in that car.
Yes.
That
Absolutely.
really was a sort of that, because that was one of the biggest problems that they've had, is that they've had previous drivers who, even if they put in a great recovery drive, the fact that they've got to do a recovery drive after Saturday at all is what was causing the problem. So that in itself was vindicating for Red Bull, and for me, that just kind of leaves the heartbreak with Norris then, who was slamming it around. Was looking very promising, going purple in all sectors. Martin Brundle was getting very excited. But ultimately, turn 9, he broke those track limits. I've said before, I was obviously gutted at the time, but I've said before that they need to stick to the track limits. They are the rules. Fair enough.
It's promising signs, though. Let's not take away everything. Like you said, rules are rules, and I'm glad they were on track limits this weekend because a couple of drivers were pushing. And it's good to see the drivers pushing, but you need to be pushing and in control at the same time. So loads of drivers were getting their times deleted all the way back to FP1, which is really good to see that the stewards were on it and not just, forgetting about it until the race comes, and then we get that bit of a dilemma we had in Bahrain. But yeah, purple sector 1, purple sector 2. I was standing up on the edge of my sofa. I was like, oh my goodness, is this happening? Is this happening? Lando Norris is going to be on the front row of the grid. And his time was fantastic. Would have put him P2 or P3. Obviously he did get track extend by a couple of inches, that's all it takes. That's all that's the rules are there for a reason. But it just makes his Sunday even more impressive, if you ask me. So he bounced back and had a decent race. But interestingly, I've just found the statistic now. So the top 8 drivers were separated by 0.48 of a second, which is the closest top 8 qualifying since 2012. It was that good of a qualifying session. And I feel like it's just going to come. I mean, we've got Hamilton, who put in a superb lap, without a doubt, in a Mercedes which didn't look like the best car on the grid yet again this weekend. Perez, less than a tenth behind him, and also Max Verstappen within that tenth as well. Brilliant job by Perez, outqualifying his teammate and really cementing, like you said, why he's in that team and why they decided to go outside the Red Bull program. Got to make a name for himself. He's got to put down those times to prove that he's here and he's going to do a good job. Max did a good job, and the Ferrari as well. 3 tenths off, not too bad at all. So all in all, a really exciting qualifying session, which was great because I was a little bit skeptical about this weekend going forward because last year it was a little bit static. The nature of the track was built many, many years ago. The cars are a lot faster, a lot wider now. So I was wondering how good of a weekend we were going to have Sunday based. But actually, with the mixed weather conditions, strategies, and multiple safety cars and red flags and all the stuff you've already mentioned, it turned out to be an absolute stunner of a weekend again, and everyone walked away unharmed, which is great. But that was qualifying. I don't think I've got anything else to say. I was absolutely heartbroken. I went from so happy to gutted in the space of 2 seconds. It was soul destroying. But I think I speak on behalf of every single McLaren fan. That's all how we all felt watching that qualifying session.
Yeah, the takeaway is still positive though. It's still positive that the potential is there, and the drama kind of continued all the way up to the lights going out because the mixed conditions, as you mentioned, and this is an overall kind of talking point for me for the whole race, is that the conditions themselves really meant that the truly consistent drivers were the ones that succeeded, because it's a really difficult technical track already. It's not very easy to overtake. Then we ended up with this really specific dry line after a lot of the rain. The start was, I mean, I don't even know how they can even see anything. When you see the onboards from the start of the race, it's incredible that they managed to keep it together at all. So both qualifying and the race really taxed all of the drivers, even the most experienced ones. I think pretty much everybody found their way onto the grass or the gravel at some point, even in the race. And it really sorted the men from the boys to some extent for me. Just going on to the pre-race as well, just tying into these sort of difficult conditions, we had Alonso hitting the wall on his way to the grid and he damaged his front wing. Vettel was pretty unlucky here. We'll talk a little bit more about Vettel in a bit, I'm sure, but he was also suffering before the race. Had some kind of brake-by-wire failure, I believe. He didn't have the tyres on before the start. They didn't have the tyres on 5 minutes before the start, but didn't get penalised until like lap 20-odd, which I don't understand
just
at all.
after he'd come out the pit stop. So he'd just done his pit stop, came out, and then there was a notification saying 10 seconds stop and go for breaching this article. But it was always
brutal,
it was a slam dunk penalty. If the teams knew that he wasn't going to be able to meet that regulation, I don't know. Don't know why it took 20 odd laps to get that penalty out there. A little bit slow on that part. I think he said in an interview where the steward's making a cup of tea or something whilst they were debating whether I could have a penalty or not, in his polite but humorous way.
Yeah, I don't understand why it took so long. Leclerc also had a spin on the formation lap.
Yeah.
So it was the conditions overall were really what made this race. It was the mixed conditions really challenging every single driver on the grid to keep it together, and that resulted in a whole bunch of people finding the wall and the gravel and having issues before the race had even started. So that to me was an indicator early on when I was watching the race. I was there thinking, this is going to be pretty mad. I think I would be surprised to see how many cars finish this. I actually thought there was going to be a whole load of retirements. I thought it was going to be like the first race of the year last season where he had all these retirements.
Austria.
So, but it wasn't. It was ultimately like 4 or 5 by the checkered flag. So because Vettel had pulled in at one point.
Oh, of course, yeah, he retired, didn't he? So
Tsunoda went out. Both Williams and Bottas. So yeah, so there wasn't as many retirements as I thought there were going to be, but there was a lot of people going off the track. That's for sure. I think it speaks to the quality of a track that has a lot of gravel as well, because it really punishes you, especially in these conditions. It really punishes you, and not only was the quality determined by those that could keep it on the track, but also by those that could recover it from the gravel. So
I'm sure we'll speak about that later on, and how not giving up was a fantastic choice. But speaking about the conditions, it was such a hard day for the rookies. Like, imagine joining Formula One. Let's take the Haas guys at the moment. You got Nikita Mazepin and Mick Schumacher. Only been in a Formula One car a handful of times. Only a few hours under your racing career. If you're Mick, I mean, I know Nikita had an off in Bahrain, so his experience is even less. But imagine turning up to Sunday and having all these mixed conditions on what looked like a slippery track, and we've got world champions spinning out, and fair play to. I know both Mick and Nikita had their own incidents throughout the race, but they both finished. They both kept it the whole way to the end. So I think a round of applause for the Haas guys, because they could have both easily binned it and it would have been put down to experience and then both being rookies in really challenging conditions. But actually, they both brought it home. A couple of laps down, I'm sure, but they both brought it home.
Both Haas cars were lapped by lap 16.
Yep, they were lapped twice after then unlapping themselves after the red flag. Yeah. So well, I said at the start of the race, oh goodness, they're going to get lapped like 4 or 5 times, which would have been the case if there hadn't been a red flag. So they could have underfueled their car by quite a bit, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, just knock a few laps off.
Yeah, exactly.
Easy bit of extra time.
Who needs 63 laps of fuel? We're going to run with 58.
Saving some money.
Oh no, we're on the lead lap. What do we do?
But that sort of was Haas all over for that race. Yeah, they were sort of pleased to finish. You could hear from their race engineers the way that they speak to their drivers as well. They're just trying to keep their spirits up, and they know how difficult it's going to be. And Schumacher had a little spin near the end of the pit lane, didn't he? Whilst he was just trying to warm his tyres up and lost it. So
that was one of my talking points, actually, was Mick Schumacher and how he was unlucky to lose it under the safety car. But we've seen drivers do that at this track last year. But then not being able to pit the following lap because the debris was still on the pit exit, which I found a little bit strange because he knocked his front wing off, must have been a metre away from a marshal point. The safety car was already out because of an incident which had occurred. I think it was Latifi's incident which called out the safety car. So Schumacher spun, knocked off his wing, had to do a lap, and then couldn't pit because there was the debris was still on the pit exit. So the pit lane exit was still closed, and they had to do another lap. Obviously, the safety car was still out, so he didn't lose too much time. But just found it very strange how the marshals just didn't step out in perfectly safe conditions and pick up that front wing.
Yeah, maybe there was another reason why it was closed. I wasn't really sure why that either. But yeah, that was very unfortunate for him. But don't lose control of your car under the safety car.
There it is.
Even when you're presented with these conditions and you've got that Haas is obviously a bit of a nightmare to drive, and one hell of a learning experience for both of those drivers today.
Absolutely. And I'm sure you do it once and you'll never do it again.
Maybe.
Hopefully not.
What's your next talking point then?
So I wanted to talk about, we've already talked about the Williams, and I've got a little segment here called like Heroes to Zeros. And we've already mentioned how qualifying, Williams did a superb job. I can't remember the statistics, so I do apologise, but it's the first time since I think 2014 or 2015 that both cars have reached Q2, which is obviously fantastic. We mentioned how in previous podcasts how the team's under new ownership, and we were expecting to see slow but sure results over the next, or slowly but improving over the next season or two. It's really good to see that they're both in heading towards the top end of the field, which is fantastic. Russell keeps up his 40th qualifying streak against his teammates. So obviously not the first session because that was a little bit of a shock for everyone, but he finished qualifying ahead of Latifi and finished. That's 40 times he's done that. But then double DNF. So Latifi lost it on lap 1, went off where everyone did on the formation lap and managed to keep it at the gravel. Has a nice bit of sponsorship there on that corner, so he managed to keep it back on get it back on the track, and joined the track and just happened to cut up Nikita. So as he pins, doing his thing, keeping it on the grey stuff, and was quite far over to the right hand side. I don't think he could have gone any further over to the right hand side.
No,
Latifi decided to carry on going over to the right hand side and just misjudged it, and he got spun into the wall. Luckily for the Haas, he came off damage free, but it was the end of Latifi's race. Saw a lot of stuff on social media about how that was so dangerous from Mazepin, but actually, let's just wipe that. Let's just debunk that straight away. He was on the track. It's the car's responsibility who's joining the track to make sure they join in a safe manner. And Latifi did join at a reasonable speed, as in like a safe speed, but he also drove in front of another car and put himself in the wall. So it's got nothing to do with Nikita. What was he meant to do? Drive into the wall himself to avoid a Williams?
Yeah,
Definitely
I think
not.
I don't think Latifi was kind of looking properly, because when you look at
No,
Mazepin's
no.
onboard, you don't see Latifi doesn't appear to be like looking in his mirrors. Maybe he couldn't see him because of the spray. I don't know, but
Potentially, yeah.
it's clear as day that he just kind of drifts onto the track a little bit haphazardly and makes contact, and that was the end of it. And definitely nothing Mazepin did wrong there.
No, absolutely not. So that obviously brought out the safety car, which lasted a fair few laps. Because he binned it in a really awkward place because he had to get the tractor out and then drag it all the way down the other end of the that little segment. And then George on lap 32. Now, we won't go into George's DNF because I'm sure we will talk about that later on in the podcast in great detail.
That's a whole other thing.
That is a whole new podcast. But yeah, George on lap 32. And it was just a shame because Williams could have scored some points here. George was running in the points for a couple of laps. I think he was going for P9 when he was going for the overtake on Bottas. I think he was in P10 going for P9. So it was looking good for the Williams team halfway through this race, and it just wasn't meant to be. So that's 2 DNFs Russell's had in Imola for the last 2 years, which is a shame.
Expensive weekend for Williams. I'm sure they could do without that.
Absolutely.
But otherwise, it was generally pretty good. Latifi was obviously out early, but it was. Russell had the fight in him. He got past Gasly for P10. Gasly, we already mentioned AlphaTauri, a bit of a lost potential for them. Why they kept Gasly on those wets
I don't know. I really don't know.
Betting on the rain sticking around, and it didn't, of course.
Yeah.
So that Gasly was plummeting down the order. Russell was able to take advantage of that, as he should be able to. Like, those are the situations you need to be able to take advantage of in these situations. And Russell, to his credit, other than the incident later on, was keeping it on the track. He was being consistent. He did have the pace. Yeah, it should have been at least some points on the table for Williams today. So it's disappointing that what happened. And they come away with it, not just with no points, but also with 2 completely wrecked cars to deal with.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that they could really do without that.
And who knows how competitive. Obviously the midfield is very competitive this year. So the chances of Haas, Alfa Romeo, or Williams getting into the points is quite low because the other teams are so tight at the moment. Actually, those points could mean a lot towards the end of the season. Like last year, it was 8 points separated the bottom 3, the difference of millions and millions of pounds. So let's keep our fingers crossed, and hopefully they can bounce back and do a little bit better.
Right, let me hit you with one of my talking points then. I wanted to discuss about the resurfacing of an old rivalry, which is the Ferrari McLaren rivalry, because it appears to be back, which is great because they have long been rivals, those teams. There's been a slight separation with McLaren. Obviously, had fallen far to the back of the grid for several years. Ferrari had been battling with Mercedes, and then we know we had their troubles where they really suffered last year. Now, when you consider that at the last Imola race in the last season, the Ferraris finished 7th and 14th. So for them to come 4th and 5th here at this race is a emblematic of the step that they've made. And it was encouraging to see that they are back in it. They're ready to fight for points and maybe some podiums again. But of course, McLaren are in the same situation. So now the rivalry has reared its head again. Just to talk a little bit more about Ferrari themselves, like I say, really positive weekend for them. Sainz is somehow, he's just been incredibly lucky in this race, I think, somehow. I usually don't like to apportion success to luck in this case, but Sainz made so many mistakes and was off in the gravel, but still managed to make up places and end up P5 despite everything. He definitely had the pace, even if he didn't have the consistency. Leclerc did very, very well to get to where he did as well. He snuck past Perez on the first lap. I think Perez was maybe a little unsighted going into the first few turns. Sainz also managed to capitalize on Gasly, managed to get past Stroll. He was really struggling overall in the wet, but managed to keep it together to get his P5 in the end. So very, very positive for Ferrari. Now, McLaren, on the other hand, their overall race, Norris had the lion's share of the pace overall. He did actually lose a few positions at the start, but did very well in a battle down the main straight to take a couple of places to take P7. This was around lap 8. And he also made it past Gasly. And then we came to him being behind Ricciardo. Now, what did you make of this team order situation?
Well, I feel like you may have read my race notes, because I've got a bit here where I ask
I didn't.
you.
I promise I didn't.
Where I asked you exactly the same question, and it's strange because I think I would give a slightly different answer if it wasn't for a team I supported. So generally, I'm quite against team orders. If there's 1 or 2 races to go and you're fighting for the Constructors' Championship and you need to let one car go to maximize the amount of points they can do to secure the win, or to secure enough points to beat your rival team in the Constructors' or Drivers' Championship, then I think that's fine, because you've got a couple of races left. I was disappointed that on race 2 of the year, team orders had come into effect. However, on the flip side, Imola is a very difficult track to overtake anyway. In the wet, it was going to be harder. And Lando, within a couple of laps of overtaking Daniel, had already made a 4-second lead. So it worked out in McLaren's favour very, very well. So I'm a bit on the fence, really. I'm glad they did it because Lando secured a podium. Daniel clearly just didn't have the pace this weekend, or had the pace, but only for whereabouts he qualified. That he's had a very safe race, Daniel did. So I'm glad they made the call, because it gave Lando the opportunity to produce the goods. I was also disappointed that so early on in the year there was team orders being delivered.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It feels a little bit cheap sometimes, especially when you have 2 drivers that you kind of want to see how they handle each other in a situation like that. And I think overall, it's only been 2 races, but overall, both the drivers at McLaren have been very respectful of one another when racing together. We already saw that in Bahrain. They were wheel to wheel, and they were very respectful of one another. I think wheel to wheel, they're both good drivers. Neither of them has a reputation for being a bit dodgy when fighting people. So that in itself should be encouraging. But I think it was ultimately the right call, because Norris clearly was going much faster. It would have only hindered McLaren's overall ability to gain as many points as possible by not letting him pass. He was so much faster that I don't know how much impact it would have had overall on his race time. But when you consider the fine margins at the end of the race, when he was on those softs and trying to hold on to those positions, that could have been the difference between him being P3 and P5 or something. That might have enabled both Ferraris to get past or something. So I think it was the right decision. I'm not too concerned about Ricciardo. There's been some talk that Norris is thrashing him, and but Ricciardo is going to take a bit of time to get used to that car. He was the same at Renault and Red Bull. It took him some time to kind of to get with the car, and he's currently has the longest active streak for points finishes, I believe, Daniel Ricciardo.
Interesting.
So he's still an incredibly consistent driver, and I think it will just take him a bit of time to get used to that car, whereas Norris has multiple seasons experience under his belt now, and he's got the pace, and I'm really glad that Norris is finding a bit of confidence in himself. I know everyone likes him because he's almost he's almost like a little kid, isn't he? He almost comes across a little bit like a teenager, even though obviously he's in his 20s now. And I get that's why people like him, and he does his Twitch streaming and all the rest of it. But it's not unreasonable to consider that this guy could fight for a world championship in the future. He clearly is good enough and has the consistency and has demonstrated some real potential in a car that is not the fastest on the grid. So in order to do that, he really needs to adopt a champion's mentality, and I hope that he becomes more confident in his abilities and he develops a kind of a quiet confidence and is maybe able to shake off a little bit of the kind of immaturity that I felt that he had earlier on in his career, which is to be expected, but yeah, has to be shaken off a little bit if one really wants to compete at the top level. I think it might make him not quite as endearing to his younger fan audience. I'm not really sure, but I think it's necessary for him to do it, and I think the the green shoots of that are poking through, and I hope that they continue to bloom for him because he has a lot of potential.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Switching back to Daniel, you've already mentioned that this is going to take a couple of races for him to get used to the new car. I completely agree. Daniel has not lost it by any means. He's still a fantastic racer. He's brilliant. I mean, he put the Renault on the podium, which is absolutely fantastic. He's the last of the late breakers. We've seen what he's done before. Proven race winner. He's got everything. He just needs to get used to that car. Probably going to a track he's only raced at a handful of times. Probably doesn't help your embedding into your new car. Maybe going to Silverstone and in those conditions, or Australia, Melbourne, or a track a little bit more familiar. He'll be a little bit more confident because essentially they were trying to learn the track again because they've only been there once before. And I say only been there once before. A handful of drivers on the grid have obviously raced there before. The slightly more mature generation. Don't want to use the word older, but the younger generation
won races there before.
Yeah, absolutely. But the younger generation, obviously, they haven't been there before, so a bit of a learning curve. And obviously, in a new team, new car, it's going to take a while. But it's a 23 race calendar at the moment. There are rumours that calendar will be binned off. However, that's not being confirmed by Formula One at the moment, so we haven't talked about that yet. So as it stands, 23 race calendar. So I'm pretty sure by race 6 or 7, he's going to be making some moves throughout the grid. Now, as for Lando, I completely agree. Fantastic young racer, has got a little bit of immaturity about him. I honestly think he'll bin off the Twitch streams in a year or two, probably at the end of this season or even halfway through the season. Like I said, 23 races, very busy schedule. Whether he'll have time for it or not, I don't know. But he'll get a glimpse of the podiums and a glimpse of the race wins. And I think that's when he'll dedicate everything to Formula One. He is obviously, I'm not saying people have to dedicate everything to their jobs, but he obviously likes playing games as a hobby, but I don't think he'll be making videos or doing that kind of stuff when he's could be putting more effort into Formula One and potentially getting a lot more out of it. But one more thing on Lando, towards the end of the race, he was on old softs, had Lewis Hamilton behind him. I know Lewis got past him, but it took 4 or 5 laps. It took Lewis to back off, recharge his batteries, and then get the DRS and use his ERS to get past Norris. Obviously, both using the Mercedes engine. But Norris was positioning his car beautifully into turn 1, absolutely beautifully, to the point where a 7-time world champion had to back out a couple of times, and he couldn't get past him. So Norris doing fantastic stuff early on this season. Really pleased to see it. Fills me with confidence that he's got everything it takes to fight for a championship I'm not saying in a couple of years' time, but at some point in his career, if he's got the car underneath him, he will do fantastic things. But I was really impressed with what he did this whole weekend. From his qualifying lap, which got cancelled, to regaining that confidence and then fighting back through the grid, asking to switch with his teammate. It's a ballsy move. And then showing that he's got the stuff and finishing in P3. Really, really impressive race weekend for Lando particularly.
And so the Ferrari versus McLaren rivalry ultimately came out. Ferrari will have bagged more points, I would have thought.
So Ferrari bagged 12 and 10, so that's 22, and Lando scored 15, and Daniel Ricciardo scored 8, which is 23.
Oh no, sorry. So they actually would have got one more because he got more for third. So it was very, very similar. So McLaren just about came out on top points wise, but I think nonetheless, even if they, points aside, I think that the prestige was held by McLaren there because of Norris holding off both of those Ferraris. When both the McLarens went out onto softs, I was a little bit like, oh, I don't know if this is the right call. This is, I understood why they did it, get in early. And Lando played it perfectly, squeezed past Leclerc straight on that restart. He did exactly what those softs were supposed to do. But it was whether or not he was going to be able to hold on that I wasn't sure about. And sure enough, he was able to do it to keep a podium spot. So, yeah, I call that 1-0 in the Ferrari v McLaren rivalry. A friend of mine has recently started watching Formula One and is a Ferrari, has declared himself a Ferrari fan. So I make that 1-0 between me and him.
Yeah, absolutely. And not much in it, but definitely 1-0. And it just highlights how far both these teams have come over the last couple of years. I know Ferrari have had their brilliant streak, but obviously last year was a little bit controversial and their speed wasn't there, but they've bounced back, hopefully legally, and taken the fight to the top 3. Well, is there a top 3 or is there a top 4? You've got Mercedes and Red Bull, but Ferrari and McLaren.
Yeah.
Who knows? Who knows? If McLaren pull out a couple of more of those qualifying, it could be a very different story going into the rest of the year.
Well, if AlphaTauri stop making if AlphaTauri stop making mistakes and their drivers stay consistent, they could be in there as well because I think they have a lot of potential.
Top 5?
Yeah, I think so. I genuinely think that car is really good, and I think that the today's race hid a lot of the potential for AlphaTauri. Gasly was doing really well. It was completely ruined by that strategy. And Tsunoda had one hell of a recovery. He made up 10 places before he ended up spinning out. So
yeah, it was a great drive by him.
It's just the consistency and yeah. So I think it could be a top 5. That would be great if it was.
That would be. That just goes to show how good this current year is. And I know it's only 2 races in, but it's been 2 very promising races, and hopefully it continues throughout the year. Right. Is it my turn? Is it my turn? My talking point?
It is, yeah.
I'm going to bring the podcast down a little bit. I do apologise. I want to talk to you about Bottas. Not the incident, but just about his overall pace this weekend. And we've already alluded to the fact that he qualified in P9, I believe, or P8.
P8 was in, yeah.
And was half a second off his teammate. I don't know. It's hard. I just want to... Right, let me start again. Bottas and Hamilton, they're always being compared. Most teammates are. Bottas started in P8, dropped down to P9, and stayed in P9 for the majority of the first half of the race before him and Russell had that incident and took himself out. Now, Hamilton came off the racetrack and ended up in P9, damaged his front wing, came into the box, repaired his front wing, came back out, was in a very similar place to Bottas, as in it was both a race restart. It was a rolling start instead of a static start, which I was a little bit disappointed about. But given the conditions, I can understand why they did it. They didn't want to have another red flag going into turn 1. But Hamilton managed to go from P9 all the way through to P2. Managed to make that Mercedes work. Now, I know in the past we've always said, the Mercedes isn't very good at following cars because it's designed to be out front. That's why it's so great in clear air. It bolts, it does its thing, and then we don't see him until the final lap where Lewis Hamilton's won by 20 seconds. But I was very shocked to see Bottas struggle so much to the point where on lap 22, have a guess how many seconds Bottas was behind the race leader.
Well, by lap 22, he was still behind Stroll, I think. So maybe a minute.
70 seconds behind the race leader. And Hamilton was only 5 seconds behind Max at this point. So he was a net 65 seconds behind his teammate. And Hamilton had damage at this point. His front wing had taken damage. Now, in wet conditions, you're not going as fast, so the car doesn't need to generate the specific aerodynamics it needs to if you're going at top speeds. But he still had a damaged front wing. And it was, according to Sky Sports, it was a very crucial part of the front wing. He obviously damaged it going over those curbs. But Bottas, this is make or break for him this season. I really feel like it's make or break because 70 seconds by lap 22 is just an awful amount of time to be behind the race leader when you should be when you're in a car as good as the Red Bull. And to qualify 8th when your teammates qualified first, how often do we see like the 2 Red Bulls take on 1 Mercedes? It's not something we've seen at all. But here we are in Imola, and the Mercedes are split by 7 cars. What's going on? What's your take on it? I don't want to be too horrible about Bottas, but he had an abysmal weekend, and I do apologise, Dave Doherty, RPM legend, if you're listening. I know you're listening, and I know you're a massive fan of Bottas, but it really wasn't his weekend, and we just want him to do better. We want him to fight for the points and be up the top, but he just hasn't got it this weekend.
Yeah, well, I do want to talk about Bottas, but much of what I've got to say about Bottas is part of the Russell Bottas incident thing. So maybe we can move on to that and discuss that.
Okay.
Because
let's do it. Let's hit the bread and butter of the podcast, the drama.
Because before we actually discuss the incident itself, for me, there's sort of three things around it that are more important and more interesting than the actual sort of who is at fault discussion.
Okay.
Because the most important issue about it is the safety, and that's that the Halo did its job. It was a massive impact for both cars, and both drivers got out of the cars and were fine. I know Valtteri had to go to the medical center and they checked him out. He's obviously a bit winded, but otherwise he was okay. And that's the most important thing. The most important thing about this is that a huge impact, huge accident, but both drivers were okay. You can see from the onboard footage that Russell's front left wheel is literally on the Halo. So if that hadn't been there, goodness knows what how different the situation would have been. If that was an accident that would have happened at old school Imola during, the Senna days or whatever, I think it would have been a very, very different story indeed. So that's the most important thing, is the safety.
Well, I just want to, while you're talking about the safety, how well the gravel played in that scenario as well, because it reduced the speed of those cars going into the barrier significantly, not by much, but at the end of the day, that was better than a like a grass runoff or a sponsorship. Those like sponsorship runoffs they have, definitely better. They scrubbed a lot of speed going through the gravel, and
Also,
their cars didn't roll either.
Part of the complaint about gravel as well, of course, is that people say that it like flips the cars, but that just seems very circumstantial. Like it can do, but it doesn't necessarily. So the safety thing is the most important thing, and the news from that is good. Now the blame game as to like whose fault it is, I don't know. I just almost like don't care. It's just a boring discussion. I'm more concerned with the implications that are raised as a result of this incident, and one of them is what you've already touched on, which is that Bottas was just utterly uninspiring all weekend. He's fighting a Williams for track position on merit. I can't fault the way that he handled the incident at all. I don't think he did. I don't think he did anything wrong.
No.
Like when you look at there's some people claim that he moved right. Obviously, that's what Russell thought that he did.
He was on the racing line.
I can't see it. He's on the dry line. He's not doing anything wrong as far as I'm concerned. So I can't fault him on this incident. But what I can fault him is that Bottas, as far as I can remember, has always been incredibly mediocre in wet and mixed conditions, and that obviously hasn't changed. And the fact that Russell clearly had the pace to take the position and Bottas didn't, and whilst George is in a seriously inferior car, is damning enough. Like that is a damning enough indictment. As for Russell, his reaction to the incident was not a good look for him or his team.
It was shocking.
And I'm not talking about the immediate exchange either. He got out the car and had a little complaint to Bottas, and Bottas gives him the finger, and Russell tapped him on the helmet or whatever. That's a whole load of nothing as far as I'm concerned. Their blood is up. They've just had a big incident. Adrenaline's pumping. Obviously, they're going to be angry with each other. But the issue with Russell was that he kind of talked himself into a hole, complaining about gentlemen's agreements and Bottas not having enough respect for the speed they were going, and rather sort of childishly getting his side of the story out on Twitter first, only to inevitably have to reel it all back in with probably this and maybe that. None of it is relevant when he's still yet to actually score any points for Williams, despite now having a handful of opportunities to do so, not least of all, of course, at this very same track, only a year before, where he also ended up doing the walk of shame with his car half buried in a wall. So I really hope that Russell hasn't kind of started to believe his own hype and get in his own way. And I think that at the time of recording, I think he has now kind of given a bit more of a proper apology and realised that the way that he reacted was not okay. Maybe Toto has had a bit of a talking to with him. I think he just needs to drop it and move on and start producing results.
Yeah. I feel like I completely agree with everything you said. And the best thing Russell could have done was get out that car, check if Bottas was okay, and then walk back to the pits. Because the fact that the Williams on merit was had a reasonable chance of overtaking the Mercedes halfway through this race was brilliant for Russell. It was brilliant for Williams. The Williams is alongside the Mercedes. This is fantastic. The team would have been loving it. And if he had pulled off that move on that lap or 5 laps later, it would have been absolutely fantastic. We would be talking about this. We would have been talking about that overtake as if it was the main part of the podcast. And it would have been fantastic for Russell and really, really cemented his prospects for that Mercedes team. But just the reaction just almost did the opposite. It wasn't the mature Russell we've seen in the past. It was just a bit of a, yes, in the heat of the moment, you can't help what you do. But I've always learned in the heat of the moment, just keep yourself to yourself and give yourself 5 minutes before you say anything to anyone.
I don't understand why the Williams PR people didn't say to him, don't go and speak to the press, don't so and so, and just keep it really simple. Why is nobody tapping him on the shoulder and saying,
no,
give it a bit of time, don't say anything to... He went in so heavy-handed and was going to make a complaint to the GPDA or whatever. No, you're just making yourself look silly. It's a bad look for him and it's a bad look for the team.
The incident itself, I thought long and hard about this, and it's a racing incident at the end of the day. The track was dry and the track was wet. The grass was soaking. Russell caused the incident by putting one or two tires on the grass and spun his car and went into the side of Bottas. Whether he was doing that through reacting to a movement, which I couldn't see.
Yeah, I can't see. The only immediate movement he makes is one to the left.
Yeah, I think Bottas was just sticking to the racing line, which is the dry line, which is the safest line for that car at that time. It was so minute. It was so close. Like, I really do think it was a racing incident and no one was at fault. But just the way it was handled afterwards, he should have just taken himself back to the pits and gone, yeah, that was pretty big impact. I'm really sorry, Bottas. I caused it, but it was a racing incident. We move on, we learn. And then he would have been respected more for attempting to overtake the Mercedes. People would be looking into that. Oh, my goodness, the Williams was right next to the Mercedes. That's how good George is. He was just about to take over this. Oh, I was just about to say the second Mercedes driver, one of the Mercedes drivers. But no, he's made the situation 100 times worse. The PR team probably had a nightmare and had to retract everything and then write an official apology on multiple social media accounts because he didn't conduct himself in an appropriate way whatsoever. Now, it was a big impact. Like I said, it was just, don't know what else to say there is about it. But
yeah, he had every right to try and make that move.
Without a doubt.
He just didn't handle it particularly well. Obviously, he thought he saw something at the time. I can't see it myself on the broadcast, but it's easy for us to replay it and pause it and look at it.
Yeah, I did a couple of times.
You obviously don't get to see it the same way. But yeah, the more interesting and more important than the blame game is, like you say, what happened afterwards. And we saw exactly the same maneuver happening at Tamburello all race long. And this was the only one that ended in a DNF. So that says something about the specific way that the overtake was handled. And the more interesting thing about it is that the implications for both Bottas and Russell are more bigger than the actual incident itself.
I think he said something along the lines of that 1 point doesn't mean much for Bottas, but it means a lot for Williams. Yeah, that may be the point. That may be true, but actually Bottas is not going to give up that position just because actually 1 point means more to you and Williams' team than it does the Mercedes team. I'm sure Bottas wants to score as many points as he does every single race, whether that be 2 points or 1 point. You don't know what's going to happen 20 races down the line. We've still got 21 races to go. Lewis could DNF twice this season and put Bottas straight back in it or put Max in it. They're trying to scrape together every single point they can to keep themselves in it for as long as possible. So the fact that he was like, 1 point means so much more to Williams, don't know why Bottas forced it so hard. I don't buy that. It's a race.
The whole thing was just him talking himself into a hole. It was just, when he was talking about it, I'm just thinking.
Big old learning point for Russell there.
Yeah, it's a definitely big old character building moment. Yeah. And hopefully he'll come out of it better. We've had our white default text on. We've had the default white text on black background apology now, as is the standard. I believe you call it
sheepish.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, the sheepish white text on black background. It is the standard issue form of apology on social media. We've received that now. Maybe Toto has given him a bit of tough love and helped him get his head straight, which is what he needs.
That was almost one of your predictions this year. It wasn't quite an apology on a black background, white text. It was more of a I've contracted COVID on a black background with white text.
That could still happen.
No, it could still happen. It could still happen, but that is definitely not a point for you with that sheepish apology. It does not count. Just pointing it out there now. I've got them all in the back of my head, you see.
Good.
But Williams almost scored points, so I would have won that one. But yeah, Bottas and Russell, what a fiasco that was.
Yeah. Yeah, the blame, like I say, the blame game just is not really as interesting as the wider implications for both drivers. It's interesting they both had what the other lacked. Bottas didn't have the pace, and Russell did, but Bottas was much cooler and calmer after the incident, whereas Russell wasn't.
I think he hurt himself a little bit. He sounded horrendous over the radio. He was properly winded, but that impact was mega, like was absolutely ridiculous. And the barrier as well didn't need any work doing to it. It just bounced the cars back and was ready to go again. I thought, well, that just goes to show how safe these tracks are in the current era of Formula One. So that was a not so quick roundup on Bottas, Hamilton, and Russell and their performances. The Mercedes trio, I shall call them from now on. But we'll see if that plays out at the end of the year. What's next? Have you got anything else for me?
I know that there's a couple of things that we will definitely cover from some of our questions in view from the stands. Yep. So I just want to bring up one more thing for myself, which is just to talk about Verstappen and his race. Obviously, he managed to have a brilliant start and was typically Verstappen-esque in his aggressiveness going into Tamburello. Had every right to take the line that he did. Hamilton obviously took a bit of damage out of it, but may have actually benefited him in some small way because of the nature of the conditions. You touched a little bit on that earlier. But ultimately, he stayed out of trouble where others faltered. He did have that one moment when it was the safety car restart, wasn't it? Where he had a little bit of a wobble coming out of the final corner. What's the name of the last sector in Imola? I'm trying to use the names of the corners because I really like that they have proper corner names and I want to use them. But I think it's the Rivats, possibly.
I can't remember.
But anyway, so he had that one little wobble there where he nearly lost it all. Like
full opposite lock.
The key moment, but he managed to hold on to it, and for the rest of the race, it was pretty comfortable for him. I remember saying to myself during the early stages of the race that, now Verstappen's got it in the lead. Like, I think that's it. I think he'll just walk off with it now, which is more or less what he did. And he shows that
he had to prove it a couple of times.
He did, yeah, and he also had to put up with, the conditions that come around with having a red flag and safety cars and all the rest of it. But he showed that he really does have the temperament. He really is there now. He has the quality. He has the temperament. He's got the car. It was a really, really solid. It was almost Hamilton-esque in its comfortability.
It was. Let's be honest. It was.
I thought it was funny when he was interviewed straight after the race, and he basically was like, just stay calm. So, I just wanted to just say that it was a fantastic win for Verstappen. I know we didn't really see him too much because he was just out front doing his thing, but yeah, it was a really, really quality victory for him. He showed that he has that consistency in those difficult conditions. Perez was pretty disappointing in this race.
It was a tough conditions, though.
It was tough conditions, but
new car.
Perez is no stranger to those kind of conditions. He's no stranger to all different sorts of cars, and I know he probably needs a bit more time to get used to that Red Bull. But comparatively, Perez was a lot more disappointing and had a few more offs. He obviously outqualified Verstappen. But ultimately, he ended up with a 10-second time penalty for overtaking under the safety car. Don't understand why he did that. He really should know better. Like, you can't overtake under the safety car. Everybody knows that, surely. I don't know whether he wasn't thinking or if he thought he might get away with it. That was just silly. And then he made a mistake, lap 38, and ended up in the gravel and was down to P14, and that was pretty much the end of it. So Red Bull will probably be a little bit frustrated, maybe understandable in the conditions.
Well, they could be leading the Constructors' Championship if Perez had scored a handful of points, because I think there's 7 points difference between Mercedes and Red Bull. Yeah. It would have been the first time Red Bull had been leading the Constructors' Championship in many years, which I'm sure they would have been happy with. Obviously, it helped that Bottas DNF'd. But the chance was there, and they didn't capitalise. And at the end of the day, I think this season will come down to reliability and consistency of drivers. And as it stands,
as it so often does,
we've got two very consistent and reliable drivers in Hamilton and Verstappen, and we've got two not too reliable and not too consistent drivers at the moment with Bottas and Perez. However, I feel like they'll both, in their own right, in on their track, on their day, will challenge their teammate, but needs to be a little bit more consistent. I do have a lot of faith in Perez, though. I think that we'll see some good things, especially with his qualifying. On a dry track and a familiar track, I think we could see some good stuff. But going back to Verstappen, that guy 3 years ago, 4 years ago, had a temper, was making rash decisions, shoving Formula One drivers in the paddock after races, and now he's blitzing, difficult conditions, breezed through it, restarted the race twice. Started the race twice because we had that safety car restart as well. Navigated through all the traffic, a handful of cars a number of times. Not to mention Lewis struggled doing that. It wasn't exactly Lewis's fault because he had to come off the racing line to go around one of the slower cars, which ended up sliding into the wall. But Max managed to do it better. So actually, that was a very Hamilton-esque race by Max Verstappen. And I love the fact he started the race in second gear. No wonder he flew off the line. He literally bolted. It was fantastic to see. But yeah, incredible race. And fair play to him. I cannot wait for the rest of the season. Why have we got 2 more weeks? It feels like an absolute age until the next race.
Right. Any more talking points, or do you want to move on to our view from the stands?
Well, let's move on to view from our stands and see what they have to ask, or what their thoughts and opinions are.
Okay, so as usual, we have our segment where we ask you what you think, and you get in touch, and we have a little bit of chat about your talking points. And today's first question for our view to the stands comes from Sugata Mukherjee. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Who got in touch with us on Twitter with a brilliant question. And they ask, do you think Max always wants to drive the car at its limits, while Lewis knows exactly when to hold back and when to send? Does that always give him an edge over Max? Shane, what do you make of these two drivers' different styles? Do you think this is a noticeable difference between these two?
I think last year there was quite a noticeable difference, and the year before there would have been more of a notable difference. But as each race goes on, Max is adopting and becoming more like Lewis's driving style, being more mature in his overtakes, picking and choosing when to overtake, picking and choosing when to send it. I think he's got a lot to learn, but he's getting there. So actually, does Lewis have the edge over Max? 100%. Way more experience over multiple different tracks, multiple different cars, over different areas of over Formula One. But that's not going to stop Max from giving it his all. And he's learning all the time. We saw that in this race. He knew exactly where to put the car, when to push. He's one of the very few cars who didn't come completely off the track. I mean, I know we had that little half spin, which we just talked about, but that was it for the whole weekend. So he's learning, and I'm really interested to see when we get back to the European races, and we've got some very familiar tracks, some high-speed tracks, where that Red Bull stacks up and what Max can take to the Mercedes. Don't get me wrong, I'm British. I support all the British drivers, but I'm loving this fight.
Yeah, and I think what Sugata has touched on here and mentioned about the Lewis knowing when to hold back and when to send and the like, I think what gives Lewis an edge over Max, and indeed all the drivers, is that whereas most drivers do need to have a period of adjustment where they maybe need to get used to conditions or they need to get used to a car, Lewis has almost never had to do that. I remember when he joined, in his rookie season, I remember what seemed to fluster Alonso so much is that Lewis was capable of looking at the data from Alonso, because he wasn't as fast as Alonso immediately. He was able to look at Alonso's data and just go out on track and immediately react to it. And he was already up to speed. He didn't need to adjust. He was just straight on it. And that kind of what gives him an advantage over everybody, because he's able to judge those conditions. He gets his eye in really, really quick. So whereas I think Max is willing to push the limits at risky times in order to try and sort of find the limit earlier. Like he tends to push around on formation laps to find the grip. And we saw that when he came out of the final corner during the restart, he was obviously pushing the limits a little bit to see where the grip was in that last bit. So yeah, I think that Lewis does have an edge over Max in that he just has the incredible ability to get his eye in and feel his way around the car so quickly, whereas Max kind of almost has to deliberately push in a certain way and to maybe always be pushing, like he says, to be testing those limits. But It's interesting. We will find out, won't we? I think this year we will find out.
Absolutely.
Who has got it. But great question. Thanks very much for your question. Who's next?
So we'll move on to the next one. This is from Rando Mouse 1. It's not so much a question, more of a view from the stands. So his view is that Valtteri Bottas swerved at high speed, causing George Russell to react and crash. Hamilton had the benefit of the red flag stop, and Max had a great start. Lando is the clear number 1, and he was disappointed in Perez. So I'll just go through that in order. We've already talked about the crash between Bottas and Russell. I think it was more of a racing incident. I didn't see anyone swerve, but I haven't seen all the camera angles in the world, so I may be wrong. Hamilton had the benefit of the red flag. Yeah, absolutely. If he was in a crash for that race, it was perfect. He put it in the wall, reversed out, rejoined in P9. There was such a separation over the field, and then the red flag came out, so they had to box under those current positions, and he kept that P9. So actually, I completely agree. Hamilton was very lucky.
Lots of people benefited from the red flag.
Yeah, absolutely. I was mentioning this to my other half, that actually some drivers would have put that in that wall and maybe given up, and maybe got out the car, caused a safety car, and that was
maybe
it.
Not being capable of getting out the gravel at the very least. He did very well to get that car out.
Hamilton didn't give up, and actually he managed to fight back to P2, which is absolutely brilliant. Max had a great start. Couldn't agree more. Lando is the clear number 1. I'm not too sure about that. He's definitely outperforming his teammate at the moment. Whether they've got number 1 or number 2 roles in the team, I don't think so. Not this early on. We've got a rookie. Lando's been in the sport for a couple of years now, so he's by no means a rookie, but you've also got Daniel Ricciardo next to him, who's very, very experienced. So I think they're on an equal playing field, but I agree with the fact that Lando is doing a lot better at the moment. But we've already spoken about how Daniel's going to take a couple of more races to get embedded in that car and then show us what he's made of. And disappointed in Perez, couldn't agree more. So Alex, your quick take on that.
Yeah, I don't think that Bottas swerved at all. It doesn't look like that to me. Definitely, I think Russell overreacted to something that he thought that he saw and crashed as a result. But from what I can see from Kimi's on board, who was right behind them, the first
he had a show, didn't he?
Yeah, he certainly did. The first sudden movement that you see from Bottas is actually to the left, and not to the right. So I don't see what Bottas did wrong. I don't think he swerved, but I think Russell thought he saw something, or maybe felt like he was being squeezed, overreacted, and we saw the results that happened. But yeah, everyone benefited from the red flag. Certainly Hamilton did as well. Amazing start from Max. Lando's definitely beating his teammate, but we need a whole season to be certain of what the status is between him and Ricciardo. And I've already stated my disappointment in Perez. So, but thanks very much for getting in touch.
Yeah, I do appreciate people's views. It is good.
Yeah, it's great. We've had loads of people get in touch this week as well, which is fantastic. So thanks to everyone. Moving on to the next person. We had a question from Michael Lewis, who actually used the hashtag view from the stands. Maybe we should make this a thing. But thanks very much, Michael. A question for Shane. How does it feel to be behind me, my wife, and 2 of your girlfriend's teams in Fantasy F1?
So here's the thing. So last year when we did this, I won by quite some margin. So I was very confident coming into this year with my teams. Unfortunately, every driver who crashed out today and DNF'd was in the majority of my team. So I was very low on points this week. So it actually puts me in position 6 in that little friend league we have. I've got basically everyone's in front of me. Everyone's got a team in front of me. So the answer to your question is I'm absolutely gutted. And I'm really hoping by the end of the year I pull it back, because I'll never live it down. Because you guys, well, I know you listen to the podcast, Mike, but I know you don't watch every single race. So if you guys end up beating me by not watching multiple races, I'd be pretty traumatized, to be honest. But thanks for getting involved. Next time, try and aim your question more at the race.
Well, I think we'll have to do an episode on the Fantasy F1, maybe a third way through the season or something. I'm sure we'll discuss it at some point. But
give me a chance to get my points back up.
I think I did a little bit better this time. I think I was a little bit more positive.
Yeah.
I had Lando as my turbo driver in one of my teams.
Oh, I didn't. I had like Perez, Bottas, Russell, Schumacher. It was a real bad weekend for me.
Disaster.
But yeah, keep those questions coming in, whether they're questions or just your thoughts and opinions. Moving on, we've got one from Riley Gale, 18. Very simple, straight to the point. Can Max win the title? Alex, what do you reckon?
Yes, he can. He
Absolutely.
definitely can. He definitely can. Whether or not he will remains to be seen, of course, but he's got the car. We've seen that he's got the quality. He's got the temperament. He's a fully matured racing driver now, and he's still got a lot of time to go ahead of him. So definitely, of course, he can win the title.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I'm going to stretch that to both titles. Like Red Bull have a serious chance of taking the Constructors' Championship this year, without a doubt. They just need to they'll be leading it if Perez had finished 5th or higher, which he should have done in that car, to be fair. So it's possible. Like Alex said, it's possible. It's whether the consistency is there.
Moving on to our next question then from @47 Robert J. Is there any chance that the old drivers, by which they mean Alonso, Vettel, Perez, are getting a lot less competitive? P.S. Love from Latvia. Hello to you in Latvia. Thanks very much for your question. Now, are the old drivers getting less competitive, Shane?
Oh,
what is the threshold for old here?
Blimey. I don't want to put that line in the dirt anywhere. I don't want to make that comparison. I mean, they've mentioned Alonso, Vettel, and Perez. Didn't put Kimi in it. Hasn't put Hamilton in it. And they're by no means old, as in age-wise, but they're very experienced and they've had a long F1.
I'm older than most of the drivers on the grid.
Yeah. So am I, to be fair, which is a little depressing. But they've had multiple years experience. We're talking like 10, 15 plus years experience in the sport. So very experienced people. But are they any less competitive than the young ones? Oh, I don't know. I mean,
I think Alonso probably is at the moment because he needs some time to adjust, readjust to the sport. He seemed very pleased that they had the conditions that they had at that track because it was good for him to get used to the car. Yeah. Alonso, again, is another driver who's very good at getting his eye in early and really sort of adapting to a car very well. So it kind of remains to be seen for Alonso. As for Perez, he's obviously been in the sport for a very long time. I don't really think of him as one of the old drivers, but he is certainly one of the more experienced ones. He also kind of remains to be seen, but I think his performance on Saturday and the way that he's conducted himself so far, I think vindicates Red Bull's decision, and I think that he will be competitive. As for Vettel,
well, we haven't spoke about him much this week. I'm probably glad to. He was very unlucky this race weekend, but that's what we haven't really spoken about.
But he really kind of suffered at the start. He had his penalty. He was unlucky to get that when he did.
Brake-by-wire issue, and then retired towards the end. So
Aston Martin had some real issues, like technical issues this weekend. So
maybe they'll sue their suppliers. Oh no!
But on the whole, I think the older drivers, and again, like Kimi, he will have benefited from a lot of experience at going around in those kind of conditions. It's hard to say whether they are in general being less competitive, but what I will say is that there is a general air that Formula One has become a bit of a young person's kind of game, and that young up and coming drivers are kind of the thing now. And yet at the same time, we have Alonso and Hamilton and Raikkonen and all these kind of Vettel and all these old guard drivers that are still in the sport or have even come back to the sport. So I don't know is the short answer to this question. I don't know.
Vettel is 33 years old and he was put in that old category. Hamilton is 36 years old. And is Hamilton slowing down at any time? I really don't think so.
He seems to be getting better.
Seems to be getting better and loving the challenge. So I think it's a little bit too early on in the season to kind of establish where drivers are currently at with the pace of their cars and their performance. But actually asking that question again, maybe in the summer break, that's when we could really dive into whether a driver has lost their edge or not. And we've got one final question from honey_badger_9. Can Red Bull win the constructors when Perez and Bottas are not so much different? So very similar to a question we've had before. Absolutely. I think Red Bull could win the constructors. Perez and Bottas are equaling each other out at the moment. But we'll see how that plays out through the season. I've got high hopes for Perez. Not so much for Bottas, unfortunately. Just how competitive that Red Bull is. I think we'll see a lot of qualifying being Hamilton, Max, Perez, Bottas. I think we'll see that those Mercedes split with two Red Bulls inside, and who knows? The McLaren and Ferraris might get up there as well. We've got a brilliant fight on our hand for the rest of the year. But Red Bull have a serious. If this is as close as they'll get in the turbo hybrid era, it's the last year, so they've got to put everything towards it. But they've got a real shot this year. They're only 7 points behind, and Mercedes are showing signs of weakness throughout the whole sport. Like, obviously, they've got issues with Bottas at the moment. It might just be that race specific, but their pit stops again weren't up to scratch. Whereas, so Lewis had a 4-second pit stop, whereas Max had a 2.2-second pit stop. That's 1.8 seconds lost in a thing which they can practice religiously day in, day out. It's not good enough. So Mercedes are showing slight cracks, and Red Bull just have to make sure that they are bulletproof and just remain as consistent as possible.
It does raise an interesting point as well about the sort of Perez v Bottas aspect that I kind of hope that we do see this season. I hope that we do see the kind of the top drivers, Max and Lewis, fighting for the championship, and then Bottas and Perez are there to kind of be the ultimate wingman. And I hope that we see a bit of a fight between them. It does, it does raise an interesting question that we may see them performing very similarly, or maybe struggling very similarly throughout the season. So yeah, it remains to be seen. But I agree, this is the best chance that Red Bull have had to win the constructors and indeed the drivers' championship for a long time. And I really hope that they're able to capitalize, because just the level of competitiveness overall in the sport right now is exactly what it needs. And long may it continue.
Long may it continue until they change the regulations next year and we're back to square one again, where the Williams is the OP team.
Yeah, Haas absolutely nail the regulations, and
you imagine?
Nikita Mazepin is the 2022 world champion.
Oh, blimey.
I just felt many people sort of recoil in horror at that idea.
Yeah, it just doesn't quite sound right.
It's just a fantasy, so just relax. It's fine.
Yeah,
fantasy.
It's fine. It won't happen. Touch wood, touch wood, touch wood. That's all the questions for this week.
Thank you for the questions.
And you can always get in touch with us at RacePerMinute on Twitter, like you guys have done, or email us at info@raceperminute.com. So, moving on to driver of the day and championship standings. Now, we can actually get into the championship standings this week, because it wasn't just the race finishing order, which we had a couple of weeks ago. So we'll go through the drivers and obviously the championship standings. But first of all, Alex, I feel like I know who your driver of the day is, and I'm hoping it might be the same as mine. Okay. But who was your driver of the day for the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix?
Well, at risk of repeating myself, this time I'm gonna go with the fan vote, and I've got to say Lando Norris. Like, it was an outstanding performance. I do want to give a shout out to a couple of drivers who I think especially one we haven't mentioned, who I thought put in a pretty good performance, and that's Lance Stroll. Aston Martin had all sorts of issues this weekend. They had all these brake-by-wire issues. That both cars had problems with gear syncs. Now, Stroll started, I think he qualified P10, and he ended up P7. He pretty much kept it on the track. I don't think I saw a single mistake from him.
No.
He was really consistent. He's actually quite good in wet conditions, so this was a good situation for him, and he brought home some points. Now, Vettel was very unlucky and struggled, but ultimately it's the points and the results that matter. And I think Stroll was a bit of an unsung hero for Aston Martin in this race. And I do try to sometimes use driver of the day as an opportunity to congratulate those kind of drivers. But there's no denying that despite the incredible recovery from Hamilton, Sainz doing really well to pick up his P5 despite issues, Norris was just brilliant, and he overcame having to deal with his lap being deleted from qualifying. He had a difficult start, but otherwise he capitalized in every single place that he did. He proved to the team that he had the pace to make the team order worth it, and to make it not, it wasn't controversial, because the moment he got past, he was already way off into the distance. And he held on those soft tires. That must have been so challenging in order to not burn them out. He did 20 odd plus laps on those softs. It was a mega performance from Lando once again, and like I say, at risk of repeating myself from the last race, he's driver of the day for me. Definitely Lando Norris.
Yeah, that's exactly who I thought you were going to pick, and it's exactly who I'm going with. And I know I picked Lando last week as well. So out of 4 possible spots over the last 2 races, Lando has filled all of them. I'm sure that won't continue throughout the year, just because we do like some variety, but just flawless. His emotions over the race weekend would have been up and down like a yo-yo, from going into the front row and qualifying to getting that lap time deleted, to starting behind his teammate, to pushing through the traffic, getting past his teammate, and keeping it all the way in P2 up until the couple of laps before the finish and dropping down P3, but keeping it on the track as well. Just absolutely superb. Can't fault the guy. He had a great weekend, and so did Lance Stroll, actually. Didn't see much of him on track, but there was action going on elsewhere. He just kept it calm, cool, and collective, and
he managed to get past Bottas.
Yes, yeah, he did. But managed to get that difficult car home, which is fantastic. At the end of the day, you want to finish first, well, whatever that saying is, you have to finish to bring home the points, and a couple of these cars didn't this week, so fair play to him.
Yeah, so that's another agreement for us on a driver of the day, which is good.
Yeah,
I can't imagine if
strange.
Don't know how much it will continue for, but moving on to the standings then. So driver standings, just 1 point separates Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen at the top, 44 to 43. And our man, we're going to get sick of saying his name. It's Lando Norris in third position with 27 points, with Charles Leclerc following up. He had a very good race as well. And Bottas currently sitting P5. Now, I seem to recall one of my predictions for this season being that Bottas would be beaten by both Red Bull drivers. It's not happening at the moment, but there is he might be beaten by more than just Red Bull drivers at this rate. So hopefully he steps it up a bit for Mercedes. But otherwise, it's obviously very close at the moment because we've only had 2 races. Double points for Alpine this weekend. That's going to be encouraging them, mainly more so for the constructors, which we can touch on in a moment. But the headline at the moment is that 1 point sitting between Hamilton and Verstappen, which is really only dictated by the fact that Hamilton managed to get that fastest lap. Otherwise, it'd be the other way around.
Yeah. Yep. So moving on to the Constructors' Championship, which is almost as entertaining. We've got Mercedes in the lead with 60 points, with Red Bull Racing on 53. So 7 points separate them. Both of their drivers, both teams had one driver outside the points this week. So who knows what that could have been if both of their drivers finished. We'll never know. McLaren, Mercedes with 41 points, with Ferrari on 34. With Ferrari, on 34. So currently beating the Ferrari team, so 1-0, like you said. AlphaTauri with 8, Aston Martin with 5, Alpine with 3, Alfa Romeo with 0, and then 0 for Williams and 0 for Haas. So those last 3 aren't a shock. But it's very close. It is always going to be close, second race into the season, but we're starting to see some cracks show with a few drivers and a few teams, and I'm interested to see where it goes. It's going to be an exciting year.
Wow, what a race we were treated to. This season has been absolutely incredible so far. I hope that it stays like this for the remaining 21 rounds. Do send us your thoughts and questions like so many of you did for today's episode. Thank you very much. You can get in touch at RacePerMinute on Twitter. You can also get in touch at RacePerMinute.com on our contact page, where you can also learn more. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can comment below, and we always try and respond to everybody. And obviously, we're trying to help build a little bit of a community around this. So do get in touch. We love to hear what you think. If you enjoyed this episode, then you can give us a rating or a like wherever you're getting your podcasts. And if you like what we do, then please consider subscribing for more wherever it is that you're getting Race Per Minute. It really helps us out. We do live in an algorithm-driven world, and people clicking on buttons and pressing things that say that you like things is basically telling the great machines that we are acceptable and that we should be shown to more people. And, to some extent, we kind of have to play the game to do that. So please help us out by giving us a like or a subscribe if you like what we do. And if you really, really want to support the show, then the best way to do that and help us keep the quality content coming, and you can receive some lovely rewards for yourself as well, is by going to patreon.com/raceperminute, where you can donate as little as £1 a month to help keep the show running. Unfortunately, doing all of this isn't free. We do value the quality of our work. It takes time, it takes effort. We have to pay bills for hosting and all of that sort of stuff, and the equipment that we've got here isn't too cheap either. So we've put that option there just because we really believe in what we do. We really think that we're creating something that we would want to listen to. I think ultimately that's kind of the goal of what it is with Race Per Minute. So if you agree and you want to keep it coming, then that's the best way to support us. Patreon.com/RacePerMinute. Well, kind of breathless after 2 rounds. We've got Portugal to look forward to next. Another classic circuit, very up and down, almost like a roller coaster. Another place where we could see some interesting weather conditions if that brings us, if that comes our way as well. So plenty to look forward to. And Shane, your final thoughts?
My final thoughts is that we've been amazed. We've been granted 2 fantastic races at the start of this season, 3 weeks apart, which is a little bit soul destroying because we came off the back of Bahrain so hyped for what could be a fantastic race in Imola, and we were greeted with this fantastic race in Imola, and then we got to wait another 2 weeks for Portugal. And I hope that this keeps on repeating throughout the whole season, because if Formula One is like this every single week, blind me, we're in for a treat.
It's
So
what all
that's
the
my
cool
final
kids are
thoughts.
watching now. I'm telling you.
Absolutely.
Some people keep saying, I hear football is dead, supposedly.
Yeah,
I hear it's all over. So watch Formula One instead.
Yep.
So yeah, thanks very much for joining us. And we hope to see you again. We've got some more episodes coming up soon, more virtual races. And of course, as far as post-race discussions are concerned, we will see you in Portugal. So thanks very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.